Pardon? Or did they give us the high sign?
It looks like the cameras are on.
Just double check.
Mr. Acton here. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Call the meeting to order.
Just barely.
I'd like to thank our media and broadcast partners for being here and reporting on tonight's meeting. I'd also like to, before the meeting begins, offer City Council's condolences to Councillor Lisa Vezo-Allen, whose father passed away last week, and she's absent from the meeting today, and we give her all our condolences from all of us here at City Council. And also, just before the meeting commences, Councillor Dufour has asked for a moment to speak about Giving Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I just wanted to remind everybody at home that tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday was an online platform that was sponsored in part by help from the Mayor's office. It's across Canada. It's a way that local charities can be supported through online donations. And I'm happy to report that in terms of St. Vincent's, the charity that I'm most familiar with, we've been very successful in receiving online payments through this promotion. So thank you very much for the time, Mr. Acting Mayor, and I encourage all residents to check it out.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we will move into the regular agenda. First, the adoption minutes. Madam Clerk.
Under agenda item 1, adoption of minutes, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolve that the minutes of the regular council meeting and the budget meeting of 2019-11-18 be approved.
All in favor? Carried. Declarations of pecuniary interest. I have got three of them, I believe, and I will note them. They are item 6.2, Huron Street Hub Trail Spoke at the machine shop property. The machine shop is owned by a client of my law firm. Just looking for the other ones. The planning matter, 7.7.1, as the applicant is a client of my law firm. And then there's an associated bylaw with the machine shop agreement, which is item 11.1.13 for the same reasons that the owner of the machine shop is a client of my law firm. Are there others? Councillor Bruni?
I've already submitted 6.15. And I forget on the bylaw one which one it is. 11.1.3. Okay. Son and daughter-in-law.
Thank you. Any other declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the approval of the agenda.
Mr. Acting Mayor and members of Council, I just wanted to make a note that there was a small date error in Bylaw 2019-233, the Sault Ste. Marie Gymnastics Club, and the appropriate change has been made by staff and the bylaw and associated agreement. So under agenda item 4, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolved that the agenda for 2019-12-02 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Carries. Delegations. We've got Community Christmas for Children, and we have Marissa Gerald. Ms. Gerald. Welcome to City Council.
Okay, so it's my pleasure to share with you our terrific news. The Community Christmas for Children calendar will be available to our children and their families for its 29th season. My name is Marissa Gerald, and along with the Community Christmas for Children Planning Committee, we are grateful the sustainability of this very worthwhile initiative continues to be successful. During the month of December until the end of Christmas winter school break, which will be January 4th, 2020, About 120 activities will be hosted by local and surrounding agencies and businesses. The annual calendar is packed with details about registration and other information that families can use to plan around. All of these exciting events are free, thanks to our many sponsors. Our sincere thanks to local media for keeping the community informed as to where and when to take part in these events and activities, and also a heartfelt thank you to our many sponsors, the organizations and the businesses that have assisted with the distribution of the calendars. And families will also receive a copy of the calendar of events through their children's school. It can also be found online at www.childcarealgoma.ca and www.volunteerssm.ca. Our Child Care Algoma office will be available for any further clarification, and we can be reached at 705-945-8898. Sault Ste. Marie is known for its generosity and acts of kindness. Together, we will be celebrating 29 seasons of the Community Christmas for Children. We are forever grateful to the business supporters and sponsors. Well done, Sault Ste. Marie. Happy holidays.
Thank you very much, and I've got a proclamation to read. And thank you to the kids who are passing around the calendar itself. Whereas children are very important members of the community, and the upcoming holidays are a particularly special time of the year for children. And whereas the Community Christmas for Children, consisting of community businesses, agencies, and organizations, plan no-cost activities for children and their families during the month of December and the school winter break. And whereas the goal of Community Christmas is to bring together to support families and brighten and enrich the holidays for children. Now, therefore, I, Matthew Shoemaker, as acting mayor of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim December 1st, 2019 through to January 3rd, 2020 as Community Christmas for Children, and urge all citizens of Sault Ste. Marie to take advantage of the many activities available for children and their families.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 5.2, World AIDS Day. We have Shanna Shipperbottom and Asia Farah from the Group Health Center.
Thank you.
Welcome to City Council.
Hello, my name is Shanna Shipperbottom, and I am support services worker for the HIV/AIDS Resource Program, HARP, at the Group Health Center. As last week was HIV Awareness Week, yesterday was World AIDS Day, and this week is Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week. We are here today to discuss the importance of community as it relates to people living with HIV. The theme for World AIDS Day 2019 is Communities Make the Difference. Firstly, I will tell you a little bit about our program. HARP is one of the major leading sources for HIV/AIDS information and confidential support in the Algoma district. Our healthy sexuality and prevention worker provides education in areas such as safe sex and support for people who identify as LGBTQ2SQ. Our outreach worker provides harm reduction materials for those who are at risk. And my role as support services is to remove barriers for people living with HIV in accessing treatment. We work closely with Algoma Public Health, Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy, OHAS, and Dr. Castellani, infectious disease specialist at Sault Area Hospital, for people at risk of contracting HIV or currently living with HIV. Every year in Northern Ontario, approximately 21 people are diagnosed with HIV. HIV is a virus that attacks your immune system. Without treatment, the virus can progress to the final stage, AIDS, where your body is left vulnerable to infections that can have life-altering consequences. Testing and early diagnosis is crucial. Treatment for HIV has advanced so far that often people only have to take one pill a day, and they can reduce the amount of HIV in their blood or their viral load to a level where they can no longer transmit the virus. There are even medications now that you can take preventatively, called pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, that you can take so that you cannot acquire HIV. But there is a big barrier standing in the way of all this, and that's stigma. Stigma is the biggest barrier to treatment and prevention. This year, HARP's campaign goal is to shift the conversation in the community. We want to engage our community in concepts that convey empathy and inspire optimism. A juxtaposition of what people traditionally think when they hear about HIV/AIDS. From this, we created Unlock Love, Hope, and Acceptance, a campaign that contains red locks, as it's simple for people to unlock for HIV awareness. You each will have one on your desk. If you could take a picture and unlock it and share it on social media, the hashtag is right on the lock itself. As a community, we need to support those who are living with HIV and break down our own preconceived judgments about HIV. We hold the key to ending HIV stigma.
Thank you very much. I have a proclamation to read. Whereas HIV/AIDS continues to be a major global public health issue, and there are about 38 million people across the world living with HIV/AIDS, and whereas each year HIV Awareness Week, Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week, and World AIDS Day provide valuable opportunities to share information and education, including advancements in treatment and prevention, commemorate those who have passed on, and reflect upon what we have achieved and what we have left to achieve. And whereas the theme for World AIDS Day 2019 is Communities Make the Difference, communities contribute with leadership and advocacy to ensure that the HIV response keeps people at the center and leaves no one behind. Communities include peer educators, networks of people living with or affected by HIV. And whereas Algoma Public Health, the Group Health Centre's HIV and AIDS Awareness Resource Program, Sault Area Hospital, and the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy are working together to increase community awareness of HIV/AIDS and to emphasize the implications on the social, physical, economic, mental, spiritual, and environmental health of the population of Sault Ste. Marie. Now, therefore, I, Matthew Shoemaker, as acting mayor of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim December 1st, 2019 as World AIDS Day, with the previous week being HIV Awareness Week and the week following being Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week, and encourage all citizens to support the initiatives of local organizations that are committed to increasing awareness and acceptance of people living with HIV/AIDS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Okay, Council, we are into the consent agenda. Is there any questions? Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. That moved along very quickly. I'm just trying to get to my... I want to ask a question about 6.1. This is the facade upgrades. I'm not quite sure who might be able to answer my question. Well, perhaps I can direct this to Michelle, if I could. I see in the report that we had set aside through budget deliberations $370,000, and the project is going to come in much less than that. Just a simple question: does the surplus go back into general funds, or is that money kept separate for future use?
Through Mr. Acting Mayor to Councillor Christian, typically it is put back into surplus once the project is completed and we know the exact costs.
Okay. That is my only question on that particular item.
Anyone else on 6.1? Okay, seeing none. Next item, Mr. Christian.
Yeah, I have a couple others. 6.7.
Yes, wayfinding master plan.
That is wayfinding master plan. Mr. Anderson, I believe, can help me with this one. A couple of just general questions here. I didn't see anywhere in the report, and it may have been explained at an earlier time, and I apologize if I missed it. Do we have any idea what this first phase is going to cost? You know, I see it's phased in, but do we have an actual cost right now? Have we identified that number?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian. We do, for this first phase, which would include the entranceway signs, as well as we're also considering implementation of the signage throughout the downtown core, so Queen Bay, the Canal District, and the waterfront. The estimate that we have right now is just over roughly about 150,000. Now, I should note that the quotations that we did receive from this firm included cost estimates from some suppliers that were in the U.S., so they are subject to foreign exchange rates, which is highly variable. So that's why we wanted to go out for RFP with this first phase and gauge where they came in and then assess what signs we were going to be phasing in.
Okay. And by the way, the information that was provided, the mock-ups and the diagrams look very impressive. I think when we get to that point where they're actually up, it's going to make the city look that much nicer. So, I'm looking forward to it. My only other question is, and this is just more of a point of knowledge for me than anything else, but it says in here that subsequent phases 2 and 3, the master plan, we're looking for funding through the municipal accommodations tax, city investment, and other levels of government. And maybe it's an unfair question, but do other levels of government usually fund things like that? I mean, is it realistic to think that the provincial or federal governments would pony up some money for signage like that?
Yes, I think you'll probably recall that a portion of this funding is through DNO and FedNor through this first phase. So that was one example of.
Was it directly for the signage itself, though? That's what I'm not.
Yes,
okay.
yes, it was, and there was also funding available through the province through their Red Fund. Unfortunately, we weren't able to pursue that this year just because of the funding commitments already from DNO counted as part of provincial funding, so we weren't able to stack that funding, but I believe in future years we'll be able to revisit that.
Okay, thank you. I misunderstood where that envelope came from in its specific, so I thank you for that. I have no further questions on 6.7.
Anyone else on 6.7? Okay, seeing none.
Yeah, I have one more. Okay. This is to Mr. Lamming, 6.8. Sioux Gymnastics Club. Mr. Lamming, are there any other gymnastics clubs in Sault Ste. Marie that we're aware of?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, yes, the Sault YMCA has a gymnastics club as well.
Okay. And the reason why I ask is I'm looking at the contract or the lease agreement that we're bringing forward, and I see that we're establishing utilities payments of $16.54.62 a month, which is at the very low end of the estimates you're giving. Do we actually know what the utilities are for that area, or do we have the capability of determining, or is it just one big utility for the building?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, what we did is we don't have a separate meter on that location, so what we did was take the square footage and then compare it to different facilities, like examples of the McMeekin Center, the roads, the Northern Community Center, and we tried to apply an average rate. And if we actually applied the actual rate, we're in excess of $4,400 per month, which would be quite a high burden. Yeah. So we tried to also utilize the historic report from IB Story, which had $529 per square foot. Right. So what we thought was a reasonable amount, they were at $500 for the last number of years. So to put that impact, we're now going to $1,655. So that really will increase what the municipality will get, about $66,000 extra over the next 5 years, also with the intent for the next agreement to introduce rent, which they've never paid before. They paid the loan payment over the last number of years to help with increase that space which they're in.
Okay, thank you. It just, when there's other gymnastics clubs, we want to be fair to the tenant, but, we have to balance that. I think your rationale makes good sense. It seems like a pretty square deal for everybody. Okay, that's it.
Councillor Dufour.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. My first item is item 6.3. I believe this will be a question for Mr. Lamming.
Just before we get to that, was there anything else on 6.8? No, sorry. Go ahead.
So 6.3 is the RFP for parking bylaw enforcement. And first off, I just wanted to congratulate Mr. Lamming on a job well done. This was something that I had dealt with and looked at very early on in my term because of many constituent complaints, and I'm very happy to see this back and with a report that looks like it's set up to succeed. So the question I had for Mr. Lamming is, what kinds of metrics will we be tracking throughout the course of the year if this pilot's approved?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, just to clarify, this one right here is actually for the downtown lots and the meters. Well, I think what you're referring to is the third-party bylaw enforcement, which will be deliberated on December 9th. So we'll be bringing that back to the 9th. So the reason this is for a one-year agreement, that'll also be for a one-year agreement. So they will come together at the same time frame. So there could be opportunity at that time frame to make they could come together potentially. But for now, this is for the actual enforcement of the downtown lots and the on-street parking.
Thank you. That clarifies my mistake.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Dufour, other items?
6.11, Biggings Avenue conversion. My question, I believe, would be for Mr. Elliott, and the question is, if approved, when would we be looking at making this conversion?
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, I'm not sure. I suppose the first thing to do is to bring the bylaw back to council for approval. Just off the top of my head, I would probably recommend we do this in the spring after the snow is gone. That might be the best time to do it.
Okay, so we could feasibly see this happen in 2020 then? Pretty comfortably?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on 6.11? No? Okay. Councillor Dufour?
My last item is 6.12, and again for Mr. Elliott. If we were successful in receiving this funding, would we still be looking at waiting until 2022 for this project, or would we consider moving it to 2021 since it was being funded by other levels of government?
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, we would probably want to blend that into the 2021 capital program. It's been deferred to 22. It was shown earlier in past programs, so if the money is there, we would probably readjust the 21 program to include it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Mr. Elliott. Maybe I'm just new to this whole thing, but so this is under the green stream. Does the federal government take any weighting, or is this provincial? Sorry, I forgot. Do they take any weighting on our multiple applications? Because I think we have other things going through other streams. Does that impact those? Do you know, or?
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Scott, I don't know.
Okay. That was the only question I had on that item. Thank you.
Anyone else on 6.12? No? Seeing none. Anyone else on the consent agenda generally? Councillor Gardy?
Thanks, Mr. Acting Mayor. I have a question on 6.9, the revenue generated from advertising. So through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, I asked this earlier of you in the day. I was just wondering if you could kind of reiterate it here this evening. In the report, you're looking at some opportunities for advertising in the city through in city facilities, parks, etc. You mentioned that there already exists opportunity through transit and in some of the arenas. You referenced that we received $60,000 from the GFL Memorial Gardens, which is 10% of the annual revenue generated in that facility. Then you talk about, you mentioned roads 1 and 2 that we have an agreement with. Who do we have an agreement with in number 2 with the Thunderbirds? Right? I was just wondering, outside of that 60 grand, in addition to it, I should say, in those other 3 facilities, how much money is generated on an annual basis?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, in addition to the $60,000 that's raised through the agreement through the Hounds, we have another $9,000 that comes in through the arenas. And to put it in perspective, when we're including transit, we're approximately $108,000 in advertising revenue, and then we're including the naming rights, pouring rights, we're upwards of about $260,000 per annum.
Thank you. I had a second question, but he answered it. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? I had a question on this item, Mr. Lamming. In Appendix E, you show some examples of advertising in Sudbury and elsewhere. And there are these garbage cans that you could see in the pictures with advertising possibilities on them. I note that they are kind of the same garbage cans you see at city parks and other things around the community. Now, your recommendation was not to allow advertising in city parks, but if we've got these cans there, and they look pretty uninvasive, in my opinion, compared to the other ads that you can see in this appendix. It seems like a kind of easy way to generate some small amount of revenue from advertising on garbage cans such as these.
Through you to yourself, Mr. Acting Mayor. Yeah, we talked internally quite a bit, and through the Public Works Department, through also city planning, recreation, and culture, and brought in a lot of history from what had been done with respect to the sign bylaw that's in place right now. And it was thought that our parks, we did not want to advertise in from that perspective. On the low end, even from bus shelters and from potential benches, we're looking at between 2,000 on the low end up to 10,000 on the high end for shelter advertising. Specifically, this type of garbage can didn't really make its way up. We were looking at some of the bigger aspects from the bus shelters and the benches to be looked at. And that's why we looked at some other innovative ways using our technology with our new app from VIA, which is getting high usage, our mobile passport app that's being used as well as redeploying the screens from the gardens right now to the roads to advertise on that. So we thought there were some ways that we could reach a pretty good base of population using some innovative ways to reach our target audience.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's for food for thought, more so than wanting to change the contents of this report. But I think it is an opportunity, even if it's minimal revenue. Every little bit counts, of course.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else on other agenda items? Okay, I had a couple. 6.4, which is payment of property taxes by credit card through, I guess, myself to Michelle. Michelle, so if I'm reading this report correctly, it's just being received as information, but it appears that sometime in 2020, paying by credit card for property taxes will be an option?
To you, Mr. Acting Mayor, yes, it is part of our implementation of our new tax system, and it's just we've had some setbacks in getting that done. It was supposed to be in this fall, so hopefully early 2020 we'll have that in for everybody.
And the user or the person paying their property taxes will be responsible for any charges associated with the payment of the taxes, the incremental charge associated with that?
That is correct.
Okay. So it will cost us money to collect money.
No, and one thing to note too is a lot of credit card companies allow that right now if you have a credit card. So if somebody wants to look at doing that, currently they can check with their own credit cards as well.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that item? Councillor Bruni?
And to Michelle regarding the credit card. Businesses lose approximately 1.5% to 3% per transaction. Would we be losing that?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, no, by using the third-party service provider, the user will be responsible for the fees that third party charges. So there's no cost to the city by doing this.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And then I also had a question on item 6.2, tender for CCTV inspection equipment through. Is it Don Elliott? Through, well, I'm used to saying through you, Mr. Mayor, but I guess as of today, it's just to Mr. Elliott. There was a lower tender price in the documents, but that wasn't meeting specifications. So what is it about the lower tender price that did not meet specifications?
Mr. Acting Mayor, there are several things we specifically specified for. Let me give you the best example. We specified a break strength in the cable over 5,000 pounds. You can get this camera stuck in sewers, and if you can't pull it out, you have to dig the road to get the camera back. So we specify a very high break strength in the cable. The other two suppliers, the low bid and the very high bid, had less than half the breaking strength for that cable. It's a communications cable. It has all the wiring in it, so if you break it, you've got a big repair, and you have to dig the road to get your camera out. So we would prefer, even on that item alone, if you dig the road 3 times, that's the difference in the cost.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Anyone else on that item? Anyone else? Okay. Councillor Scott?
Just further to that item, Mr. Acting Mayor, is there a way where if this comes up again, maybe we can get a little more information in the report or maybe an appendix as to why it doesn't meet specifications? Because I was having the same kind of question, and it didn't make sense until I saw that Councillor Shoemaker was asking that. So just for future reference, I'm not sure if there's something that we could make sure we include, or I don't know if that's a question.
I think that's probably a question of the CAO generally.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Scott. Really, for the amount of tenders that we do and the tremendous variance in the type of things we tender for, I think I would probably recommend you leave it to staff to determine whether it's in compliance or not, but then should an item come up, just as you've done tonight, and Acting Mayor Shoemaker, to question why something wasn't in compliance, and you get the answer stated in a public meeting.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else on any other agenda items in the consent agenda? Okay, we're flying through this. Seeing none, we read the resolution.
Under agenda item 6, consent agenda, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolve that all items listed under date 2019-1202, agenda item 6 consent agenda, be approved as recommended, save and accept agenda item 6.15 and 6.20.
All in favor? Carries. So I think we will move to 7.3, if I'm correct, Mr. CAO. So do we want to read the motion first?
Under agenda item 7.3.1, revised economic development and tourism model, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolve that the report of the Chief Administrative Officer dated 2019-1202 be received, and that Council approve a new model for tourism and economic development. Further, that Council authorize staff to create a new tourism non-share capital corporation and solicit applications for board members, which will be returned to Council for approval. Further, that staff work with Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation Board to support the transition to its new mandate and solicit applications for vacant seats on the Board of Directors, which will be returned to Council for approval. And further, that Council approve the migration of economic development and tourism staff to the city within community development and enterprise services.
Okay, Council, the CAO is going to give a brief summary of this matter, and then we'll take any questions.
Through you, Acting Mayor and members of Council, as the report states, this is a recommendation to move to a revised model of Council delivering its economic development and tourism services. The model is outlined extensively in the report. The revised model has been canvassed with the EDC board, and the EDC board has provided their resolution of support that's attached to the report. We would look at doing this transition effective January 1st, 2020. There will be a fair amount of detail work to do to meet that target and to move to the new organized entities. The EDC, of course, would be maintained as a not for share capital corporation. We would be creating a new tourism services corporation as well. And as the report notes, the existing staff that handle both services at the EDC would be migrated to become city staff, reporting to those boards.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you. Through you to either Mr. White or Mr. Ver. These boards, the remaining Economic Development Board and Tourism Board, I know that it's important for these boards to be genuinely respected in terms of the advice and support that they would give back on both of those sides. How do you see, or I don't think it's in the report specifically, but how would those boards be selected?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. The boards would be selected in the end. The Tourism Board immediately, the EDC Board after it would have to make some necessary revisions to its existing bylaws. What we foresee is each board would have 9 members. Those members wouldn't include staff or city council members. They would be entirely separate. They would be selected through our current nominating committee process. However, I would foresee those boards doing what some of our other boards and committees do now. They identify specific skill sets or specific viewpoints that they wish to see on those boards. They provide that information to the nominating committee. Then the nominating committee assesses those needs and wants with the applicants that come in to then recommend those for approval.
Okay, I just think it's really important that if we are respecting the advice and the guidance of those boards, that there is as much autonomy in the selection of who is on those boards. I think it's very important that council or staff are not on those boards, that there's independent advice and expertise that helps us in both of those two areas. I have one other question, and I know this is not in the report. Obviously, bringing these 2 departments inside the city, there would still be the requirement, I would think, of annual business plans to be developed and initiatives to be undertaken, and those business plans to look to achieve certain goals, et cetera. Who approves those plans, or how do you foresee that working?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. The way we foresee that process working is that the staff under each of those, or servicing those areas, whether it's economic development or tourism, would develop those kinds of strategic and operational business plans, develop the budget that would be associated with that, and bring those to these entities, the Economic Development Corporation and the Tourism Development Corporation, for a thorough review and approval at that stage. Those entities then recommend it for final approval by council.
Okay, so essentially, I think what you've said is that those those boards of expertise and guidance are going to give their approval before it's brought to council for,
That's correct.
For approval.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know certainly in the case of Tourism Sault Ste. Marie, in the past, it's been very highly recognized in terms of how they do their work and the business plans and initiatives that have been undertaken, both provincially and federally. So I think it's important to maintain some of those ways of doing business, if you will. Thank you.
Councillor Christian?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I'm going to assume that EDC staff, everybody's aware of what's coming down the pipe, or at least what's being discussed here tonight. Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to the CAO.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian. Yes, the staff are aware. We will be dealing with them formally starting tomorrow, okay. Presuming that council approves this report tonight.
Now, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to the CAO, since we're essentially taking these employees, will that require any existing structural changes within the administration of the city? Do you see departments shifting in any way because of taking over the EDC area? Do you see that happening?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we do see these 2 entities, economic development and tourism services or tourism development, being separated as 2 verticals within community development and enterprise services. Certainly, we've seen a lot of overlap in the types of work being done. In the case of economic development, certainly our future SSM staff have been doing a number of similar things.
Yep.
On the tourism side, there's always a certain amount of overlap between what you see being done by the tourism services staff and what we do with community services. Right. Often what makes something good for tourists is also good for the citizens of Sault Ste. Marie and vice versa.
Okay. So you kind of answered my other question, which is we're going to do our best to maintain staffing, but where there is redundancies, we're going to have to look at either other alternatives or deal with those redundancies as we see them.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, anytime you bring staff into the organization, you do have to review what everybody is doing and whether there are redundancies or duplication. On the face of it, we don't see that as a major element in this. We really see the advantage of having a one-team approach now because of the overlaps in it, and we think it really makes things very effective for us going forward, especially if one area has a large event or a large undertaking, it's easier for them to tap resources from an associated area within that service area. Okay. We have also stated that the funding envelope that Council provides for economic development and tourism development will stay unchanged. Okay. So this is not a cost-cutting exercise.
Okay. Two more questions, and I think you've already answered one of them. I just want to get back to the original question, which is Enterprise Services is absorbing this group. Does that require a restructuring of that division? Will anything move somewhere else, or is it all going to stay intact, even though they're absorbing this sector?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we're still working out some of those details. While we know on a broad level the duties of the existing EDC and tourism staff, we have to have further conversations and see exactly what everybody's doing, exactly what needs to be done, and also really have a kind of deep dive into how they match up best. So there may be some restructuring within community development and enterprise services just to make sure we're maximizing things.
One final question. In the past, the Innovation Center, the EDC, spoke of how they were able to access government funding because of their structure and their designation. Are we still able to access any potential funding as it used to be with this new model coming forward? Does that impact it at all?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, yes, that's why we're retaining the Economic Development Corporation as a corporation and creating the Tourism Development Corporation as a corporation. Okay. Yep. We've certainly examined it, and by retaining those corporations, we would still be able to access funding that may not be able to be directly accessed by the municipality.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Through you to Mr. White. Mr. White, back to the composition of the boards. I'm clear on the new tourism board that will be created in corporation. But as far as the existing EDC board, could you speak a little bit more to the transition and what actually happens to the present board? Does it stay intact, or do we eventually get to a totally new board?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero. At the present time, it would stay intact. However, we would be looking over the next few months as a transition to sort out, for instance, right now it has some tourism representation on that board. That representation doesn't need to be there once we create the new tourism corporation, so it would move over there. Certainly, we're, I think, interested in having existing board members with the EDC continue on for some element of continuity. In the end, though, we would look at having a 9-member board of business experts, and we'll have to discuss things with the existing board as to how that gets covered. Obviously, on the tourism side, we're looking at 5 members from the accommodation partners in the city and 4 from tourism attractions in the broader tourism sector. With the EDC board, I think we have to look at and discuss a little more with them what kind of representation they need to be most effective in the role of providing that expert advice to council.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. White. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bruni?
Mr. Acting Mayor, a question to Mr. White. So when would the transition period be completed for the EDC and the tourism model? Do we have a time frame for this?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we are intending to migrate the staff over to the city effective January 1st, 2020. The rest of it, we still have to work out details, and I would imagine a more thorough report will come in January to you, just outlining all the steps that we are taking. I would see the creation of the tourism entity happening fairly soon. We do have to look at all the agreements the current EDC has with other partners and work through all the ins and outs of that. I would think both the existing EDC board and ourselves are interested in getting it completed as soon as possible. So I would certainly hazard a guess that within the first quarter or very early into the second quarter of the year, we've managed to achieve the transition.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. CAO, so you mentioned it in response to Councillor Christian's question, but I think we currently spend, is it 2.1 million on economic development generally, from the city's perspective?
Through you, to Mr. Acting Mayor, I believe that's in the ballpark. Council should be aware too that with the now collecting the municipal accommodations tax, there is will be some further resources applied to the area of tourism that we didn't have before.
So of the 2.1, let's call it 2.1, if that's in the ballpark, we'll still spend that same amount of money on economic development, generally speaking. Just now, the staff will be reporting through your office up to council rather than through the board.
That's correct.
Okay, and if we're assuming, or if we're hiring employees who are currently EDC employees, how do the compensation and benefit schemes at the EDC compare to the city scheme?
To you, Mr. Acting Mayor, they actually compare fairly well. The EDC did use our compensation matrix, and that is a fairly good guide. We will be bringing people over at their current compensation, and obviously we'll have to look at their job descriptions, look at any employment contracts that are present, and then assess those within our job evaluation system, and eventually over time everything will fit together quite nicely.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Are there any comments? I'll just note that obviously the mayor is in favor of this, as we all know. One of the points that he's stated previously that I think makes this gives this report a lot of sense from my perspective, anyways, is that as councillors, we often are the ones that the community looks to when there are economic development initiatives or when there are economic development problems. And in the present model, there are only so many levers at our disposal to fix the problems or to pursue the initiatives. So this, I think, will give council a lot more. It'll give us actual ability to have some effect on economic development in our community, whereas before it was, a negotiating or a soft effect. This will be an effect where we will have levers at our disposal through the CAO's office to pursue opportunities or to, or to change course if need be. So we have seen the city and the EDC work together on things like the NORAD submission. We have seen people turn to us when issues arise, like the Agiro closing recently, and I think that the transition will give us the ability to resolve these matters in a more direct way than we're currently able to. So for that reason, I think it makes sense, and I trust council will support it. All in favor? Carries. Oh, and it's you got to vote on your screen as well.
Councillor Christian? Yeah.
It came up.
In the affirmative or negative?
I'm in favor.
Looks like it carries unanimously. And we can go to 7.3.2, the municipal transit accommodation tax. Is there a resolution? It says no resolution to display.
There's a bylaw, 2019-244.
Okay. Have we got any questions on this report? We can move the bylaw up if there are any questions. Councillor Hilsinger.
I have one question. I notice in the, it's stated here that the city of Sault Ste. Marie would be allowed to apply to the Tourism Development Fund. To Mr. Vare, can you explain that, please? Why?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. We suggested that to have flexibility for the city if we have a larger tourism project that couldn't be accommodated in our share of the MAT funds. We may want the flexibility to be able to apply to that Tourism Development Fund and seek support to get funds to undertake a major project.
Okay, but once again, the approval of that, the approval of projects to the Tourism Development Fund, as stated in this note, are by that 9-person independent board, correct?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, that's correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else on that matter? To Ms. Schell. We've got just to follow up on Councillor Hilsinger's question, we've got a major conferences and events reserve, if I'm not mistaken. How much is that per year? I'm catching you off guard. I know I haven't.
To you, Mr. Acting Mayor, excuse me, if I recall, it's $20,000 a year.
Okay. I guess my general question would be if there's this tourism funding available, it may make more sense for all the funding to be in a single area rather than having a major conferences and special events pot and then a MAT pot. It may make more sense for the $20,000 to be added to the amount that in the Tourism Development Fund. So might make things simpler. Any other questions? We have 8 minutes till planning, so.
You can finish off the bylaws.
Oh, yes, okay, so we will will we vote on this matter separately or with the bylaws?
May as well just keep it.
With the bylaws, okay. So that brings us to the bylaws. And there's, I think, one that is taken out of here.
Under agenda item 11, consideration and passing of bylaws, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolve that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda, under date 2019-1202, save and accept bylaw 2019-234 and bylaw 2019-245 be approved.
All in favor? We can do the one that Councillor Brune is in conflict on, and then I'll have Councillor Christian take the chair.
Under agenda item 11.1.3, sale abutting 1 McGregor Avenue, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolve that bylaw 2019-234, being a bylaw to authorize the sale of surplus property legally described as part PIN 31539-0019 LT to Mika Tomasic and Michael Bruni be passed in open council the 2nd day of December 2019.
All in favor? That carries. Okay, I'm in conflict on the next one, so I'll excuse myself, and then I'm in conflict on the planning matter, so I'll just remain excused.
Under agenda item 11.1.13, funding for Hub Trail, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Scott. Resolved that bylaw 2019-245, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the funding agreement between the city and 1188004 Ontario Inc., Tony Porco, to establish the Huron Spoke Trail on the machine shop property be passed in open council the second day of December 2019. And I'll just,
All in favor?
oh,
Carried.
oh, sorry.
So that brings us to, I believe, the planning item. We're a little early.
We are a little early, Mr. Acting Mayor, and because of Planning Act provisions, we should wait till 5:30. However, we can address the closed caucus session motion.
Okay.
Under agenda item 13, closed session, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolved that this council proceed into closed session to discuss two proposed issues concerning acquisitions, disposition of land, and matters subject to solicitor-client privilege. Further, be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
Council, all in favor? Carried. I guess we've got 3 minutes.
Mr. Acting Mayor, yes, we do.
So
Three
I guess we shall sit here for 3 minutes. Okay, guys.
Mr. Acting Mayor, you can now resume with the meeting. The Deputy Clerk will introduce the item, and the Planning Director will give a synopsis of the item.
Under agenda item 7.7.1, A2019Z OP 35 Cedar Street, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Scott. Resolved that the report of the planner dated 2019-1202 concerning official plan and zoning amendment application A2019Z OP be received, and that City Council approve the application as follows. 1. Approve official plan amendment number 225 to redesignate the subject property, 35 Cedar Street, from industrial to commercial. 2. Rezone the subject property from medium industrial zone M2 to traditional commercial zone C1.S, with the following special exceptions. 1. Reduce the northeast lot line setback fronting Cedar Street from 5 meters to 2.9 meters for the easternmost building, Building 1. And 2. Exclude nursing and residential care facilities, residential dwellings, and rooming houses as permitted uses on the subject property. 3. Designate the subject property as an area of site plan control pursuant to Section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect this approval.
Thank you. Mr. McConnell.
Is an existing industrial property on the corner of Cedar Street and Tankard. The application, as the Deputy City Clerk mentioned, is for an official plan amendment and rezoning to change the designation on the property from industrial to commercial. It is recommended for approval. Council should be aware that the applicant did hold a neighborhood meeting. There were 2 neighbors in attendance. I think it's fair to say that they were both very supportive of this application. And the applicant is in attendance tonight, should council have any additional questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone in opposition to this development, first of all? Seeing none, are there any questions from council to Mr. McConnell on this issue? Seeing none, all in favor? I'm sorry?
Can I speak?
Yes, sure, go ahead. What's that? Yeah. Sir, can you identify yourself for the record?
I'm Stan Elliott of Elliott Engineering. I'm the owner of the property.
Okay.
So one thing I just wanted to touch base on was the one clause where residential dwellings were not permitted. One of the things that we don't know at this point is the plan is to eventually subdivide the property into 3 pieces. It's mentioned in the report. I didn't note that I was looking to exclude residential dwellings, but it was noted, and Pat Ginty and I of our office had looked at the possibility, and it's not even likely, but it's a possibility that the strip that fronts on Tankard, there's actually more than enough room if we wanted to do a multi-unit, like a 3 or 4 unit place there. And I'm just not sure if we go forward with that clause, if that would ever be permitted, or if we'd be able to come back to council to.
Mr. McConnell, Mr. McConnell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. The reason staff is recommending that those uses be deleted is under the current industrial zoning, they are not allowed. Right. The property is surrounded by industrial zoning, and it is possible to have manufacturing and other fairly heavy industrial uses there. The province has guidelines, and in some cases more than guidelines, requirements for minimum distance separations from sensitive uses such as residential uses and certain industrial uses. So by allowing residential uses on this property, we may in effect sterilize some of the industrial property around it. And under those circumstances, the recommendation is not to allow residential uses. I note that the zoning currently does not permit residential uses.
And for the purposes of tonight, we're simply changing the zoning from medium industrial to commercial.
That's correct. Now, under commercial designation, you can have certain residential uses. Right. What we're saying is, given that the property is bounded on 2 sides by a fairly heavy industrial designation, that would not be appropriate at this location.
Okay.
And that's fine. The reason I brought it up is actually the neighbor across the street from our property was concerned about, or had some initial concerns about the use and whatnot, and one of the things we had thought about was possibly putting a residential strip in there. We never really talked about it too seriously, but it was just pondered. Okay. And if it's not allowed, that's fine. I just wanted to address it. So.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we've discussed the matter. We see no questions. All in favor? Carried.
It's just
The voting in process. Mine doesn't work. So.
Are you in the firma? Okay.
Okay.
Council, we have one last matter, which is the adjournment.
Under Agenda Item 14, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.